Hey, we're live, and let's see, we'll wait a moment here to get some more people in before we get started. And if you want, I know many times people like to know who's on webinars because we all kind of know each other from the league stuff. If you want, go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody in the chat. So feel free to do that while we're waiting for everybody to come in. Okay. Oh, looks like we got a bunch more coming. Okay, it looks like we're kind of reaching a little bit of a plateau here. I'm sure other people will join us as I'm doing my introduction portion. So I'd like to welcome everyone and good evening to our webinar on people-powered fair maps and the redistricting process in Massachusetts. In addition to welcoming all of our league members and across the state and friends of the league who have joined us, would also like to extend a special welcome to Margie Burgess of the Plymouth School Committee, Maya Rayner from Senator Sonia Chang Diaz's office and also Beacon Block, Alicia Bowman from the Newton City Council, and Courtney Henderson of South Shore Alumni Chapter of the Sigma Gamma Rho sorority. So thank you for joining us this evening on this important topic. We're thrilled tonight to have two special panelists to kick off our webinar. The first is Juan Jaramillo, who is in Revere and Winthrop, and Beth Wang, who is director of Mass Voter Table, in that person that we work with quite often on many topics. As we all know, having fair maps is really important with regards to achieving racial equity, and also the redistricting maps, they're set in place for the next 10 years. So we want to ensure that these are done correctly in terms of transparency and fairness. So tonight, Ron will kick off our webinar by providing his perspective on the importance of redistricting for fair representation, followed by Beth giving an overview of the redistricting process in Massachusetts and its importance in achieving racial equity in the state. And then following Juan and Beth's presentations, there'll be a Q&A section where you can ask questions of them. And please type your questions into the Q&A box. And then after that, I will follow up with a presentation on the league position and criteria for redistricting, and then an overview more specific in terms of the timeline and the process within Massachusetts. Elizabeth Foster Nolan will then outline next steps and that we all can take to be involved in the process for drawing fair maps in Massachusetts. And as I mentioned, put your questions in the Q&A, and we will be recording the presentation and post it on our website, in addition to posting the presentation itself on the website so that you can refer back to it and share it with other people. So as introductions, Juan was recently ran for state representative for the 19th Suffolk District, which was Speaker DeLeo's district, which includes the entire town of Winthrop and the coastal community of Revere. Since high school, he has worked as a mentor for young people, serving as Big Brother in the Big Brother, Big Sister program, a program director for Revere Youth in Action, and as a coach for Pop Warner football in Revere. He has interned with Speaker DeLeo's office and served as budget director for State Senator Joseph Benacore. And he also represents frontline workers at the Service Employees International Union 32BJ. And then our second speaker, as I mentioned, is Beth Wang. She is director for Mass Voter Table, and she is also a key organizer for Drawing Democracy Coalition, which is focused on fair maps and a full transparent process being conducted within the state of Massachusetts. She's been an organizer for groups, students, and also in civic organizations since her time at University of Wisconsin. She's a Badger. And she has been in the mass voter table position for about the past 4 years. She's been a mass voter table, as many of you know, is a key group that we work with in terms of election modernization coalition and voting rights work in Massachusetts. So with that, I would like to turn the speaker over to Juan, and Juan, take it away.
Thank you so much, Judy, and thank you to the League of Women Voters and for everyone for putting this together. I'm humbled to be here with Beth Wang. I actually started my organizing work with the Massachusetts Voter Table when I was program director for Revere Youth in Action. The organizing work here in Revere, we were the only organization doing grassroots social justice work here, empowering Black and Brown working class communities to come out and vote, to exercise their right, and to make meaningful change in the Commonwealth. We worked on things like paid family and medical leave and raising the minimum wage. And I learned a lot from the Massachusetts Voter Table. So just great to be here with such an amazing leader as Beth Wang. My name is Juan, as you just said. I just ran in the special Democratic primary for the 19th Suffolk District, which includes the entire town of Winthrop and about 7 precincts in the city of Revere. And I'm very excited to talk about this topic because legislative districts range from about 40 to 50,000 people, depending on how many people live in them, right? And this district has roughly around the same time, around an average size, 45,000 people. Since the last American Community Survey, which was held in 2019, it was estimated that the town of Winthrop itself only had about 18,000 people in it, 18,500 to be a little bit more exact on that number, and meaning that well over 20,000 of the people in this particular legislative district actually lived in Revere. And what we saw in the election, unfortunately, in March 2nd, right, is that the will of the majority of the voters was not upheld, right? I think that, interestingly enough, the Revere part of this district is largely non-white, North African Latinx voters, who, what I found, which has been the case because I've been doing electoral work in this part of the state for a while, are working a lot, right? And special primaries in particular are not friendly to them. And so oftentimes a district like this one, where the 7 precincts that are in this district, that are in the city of Revere, which I just mentioned, there are 18,000 Latinx voters alone. That does not account for North African immigrants. This does not account for our brothers and sisters in the Black community. There's a large Southeast Asian population here. This is just Latinx voters, of which this entire city is composed of 33% here in Revere. But which is just about the same size as the town of Winthrop. We have no representation, not just no representation at the state level. There's no representation at the city level. There's no representation certainly no representation at the federal level in terms of the demographic and even the economic makeup of this district, right? The town of Winthrop has an average a median income of over $74,000. The city of Revere has $10,000 less median income. I can guarantee you that the 7 precincts in this particular, the 19th Suffolk District, their median income can't reach, I can't imagine it reaching even 60,000 because it is a large, high density immigrant population. So what we're seeing is large swaths of historically disenfranchised communities continue to be disenfranchised, right? And they continue to be represented by folks who don't really value their experience or need to appeal to their experience in order to get elected. In the town over in the city of Chelsea, right, we have a similar story. The same survey that I just referenced says that Chelsea has about 40,000 voters. Yet there are 2 legislative districts in that town, in that city. Neither of the people that occupy it look like the city, which is 62% Latinx, right? So there's a really big opportunity in redistricting now that we've completed the census work. We know, in particular, in the 19th Suffolk District, we know that because the town of Winthrop has been a little bit slow to come to new development and to bringing new families in, that they actually have not grown much, and that the city of Revere, the part of this district that is in the city of Revere, probably has grown. There's been development here over the last 4 years that has skyrocketed because it's got 3 train stations, it's got easy access to the North Shore in New Hampshire, easy access to Boston. And so that we know that this particular part of the city of Revere, which we're going to find out probably has upwards of 60,000 people, deserves a legislative seat of its own, right? And so how do we get there, right? The work that the League of Women's Voters is doing, the work that Beth does at the Massachusetts voter table is integral to that part of representation. We understand that the voter here, well, and for the whole other slew of issues, right? The voters here are disenfranchised, right? On election night at 7 p.m., I called the lady. Her name was Thais dos Santos. She's I found out is a Brazilian immigrant. I got on the phone with her and I said, Thais, polls are about to close. She said, I know there was an election today. I'm gonna go vote for you, but I just got home from a 12-hour shift cleaning houses all over the city and all over the state, and I just can't make it. And I made an appeal to her. I said, told her about my story. I told her about my opponent, who unfortunately is running as a Democrat, but far from it. And she said, I'm sorry, Juan, I can't help you. I'm too tired. I got a daughter. I can't do this. I got off the phone. I was convinced she wasn't going to make it to the polls. And I got a call about 7:45, which really was the silver lining, in that, like, if we talk to the voters, especially voters like this, voters like Thais, voters like my dad who works 16 hours a day, if we talk to them about the issues and the importance of voting, we can get them engaged and they can get the representation that they deserve. I hung up the phone about 7:45. I got a call from Thais. She said, Juan, I believe in you. I believe in what you're fighting for. I know that what you're fighting for will affect me and my family directly. And I was able to sneak out for about 10 minutes, and I got to the polls and voted. The Revere part of this district, over almost 65% of the Revere part of this district voted for me. I won every single precinct in the Revere part of this district, which again, Latinx, North African, people of color, Black and brown voters, working class folks who are yearning for representation. And unfortunately, the way that this map in particular was set up was not helpful to them, right? And does the population here exist to have 2 seats in the city of Revere? Absolutely. I just told you, the town of Winthrop since 2019, according to the American Community Service survey, does not have the votes to have a seat, yet they've had this seat for now over 30 years. And we'll have it for over 30 years, right? And so we have to think better and bigger about how we build our next maps to ensure that that we have adequate representation. We have people fighting for the needs of the voters and of just people. It doesn't even have to be voters, right? I was formerly undocumented, and I know that the policies that I brought to the table would have helped me at some point when I was undocumented. So I'm gonna actually send it right off to Beth, and she's gonna tell you a little bit as well.
Okay, thanks so much for sharing your story, Juan. I know that I was so inspired by the campaign that you ran as a candidate from the community to show that representation really matters, and that the way that our districts are drawn really impact the ability for people's voices to be heard. So thank you for your courage for running. I know that it takes so much out of so many people to put themselves out there. And it's great to join the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts tonight. I want to take a moment to thank all of you for your hard work to get out the count in the 2020 census. An accurate census is the foundation for a multiracial democracy in Massachusetts. It's so wonderful to see some familiar names from the MassCount's phone banks like Eva and Adrian. At the Massachusetts voter table, we work very closely with the League on civic access to make sure that everyone who wants to vote can vote. I see Nancy Brumback on this call. We work really closely in the Election Modernization Coalition to advance voting rights and civic access. We work really closely with the League on civic engagement to make sure that everyone who can vote does vote, like that working class Brazilian immigrant voter who Juan was talking about before. I know that League members have made so many get out the vote calls, so have participated in the election protection hotlines to make sure that everyone who wants to vote actually does cast their ballot. And then finally, we work with the League on civic representation, which is the idea that if you and your neighbors vote, then your elected officials will represent you and your community's needs in City Hall, the State House, the zoning board, the school committee, everywhere where people make decisions that impact your everyday lives. And so we are so thrilled to work with the League of Women Voters on civic representation, and we partner with the League on the steering committee of the Drawing Democracy Coalition. So I'm going to share a few things, such as what is redistricting, why it's important, and how you can be involved before Judy does a deep dive on redistricting. And so just the basics is that redistricting is the process of redrawing electoral district boundaries. There are some parts of our state that have grown dramatically in the past 10 years because of development, gentrification, immigration into Massachusetts, and more. It's meant to ensure that every person has fair representation at the local, state, and federal levels. That we use that census data that's collected every 10 years to draw new districts that each have about the same number of people, probably around 45,000 people each for a house district. The new districts account for all of the ways that populations have changed and moved across states and districts. This is incredibly important because how district lines are drawn influences who runs for public office and who's elected. Elected representatives make decisions that are important to our lives, from ensuring safety in our schools to adopting immigration policies. Once drawn, these district boundaries are in place for the next 10 years, so these will be used in elections from 2022 until 2031, and their policy impacts can last well beyond those 10 years. And so the main point is that who represents your community really matters. The redistricting process has been misused at times to reduce communities' political power. The two speakers before Bob DeLeo was a man named Tom Finneran, who I'm sure that many of you remember. He lost his speakership in 2007 after he perjured himself after overpacking Black voters in Mattapan and pretended that he actually knew nothing about it. This was a way for Tom Finneran to dilute Black voters' power, and he got caught, and he then was caught, perjured himself, and then lost his speakership, and ultimately had served a term in federal prison. And so that's why it's so important for advocates like us at the Massachusetts Voter Table, the League of Women Voters, and many of our partners and allies to stop legislators from diluting communities' power. And the best way to do that is by getting involved in a fair and transparent process. At the Drawing Democracy Coalition, which the League of Women Voters is a leader in at the steering committee, we are planning to define the communities of interest, or the places where people gather, the people where the places that connect people to their communities, and we're going to weave them together in one statewide map. That includes 160 House districts, 40 state Senate districts, and very likely 9 congressional districts. When we present one vision for a more representative democracy, then we have a better chance for winning greater equity in the next 10 years. But if we are divided and everyone is advocating for their own districts, we know that state legislators will be able to divide and conquer us and draw maps that best preserve the power of incumbents in office. And so the way that we're going to win a fair map is if we come together and present a shared vision, and we can all play a pivotal role in making our democracy more equitable by participating in the redistricting process. There are many different ways to get involved. First, by defining your community of interest, which locations, landmarks, and gathering places in your community are most important to keep together in one district. Recruiting spokespeople to share stories about what matters to their communities as part of statewide testimony. There will be lots of hearings coming up, and we definitely want all of you to be involved in advocating for your communities of interest and also for the statewide unity map. We want you to attend redistricting hearings that will be held by the Joint Committee on Redistricting and share all of your ideas for districts. We want you to meet with your state representatives and senators to share what keeping your community whole means to you. We know that you're really good at writing letters to the editor and op-eds about what's at stake in the redistricting process for your community. And then we want you to stay engaged so that you can respond quickly to proposed map ideas. This can be a long process with a very messy timeline. Organizing more people to cover the different hearings will spread the workload to more than a small set of people or organizations. And then finally, we know that the League is filled with leaders and spokespeople who emerge from your communities through this process. And we ask them to consider for running those for the seats that will be created. And so finally, you know your community best. You can help shape its future by telling the story of your community and in the way that you want it to be told. That's why we can't wait for you to be involved in the Drawing Democracy Coalition. We are so excited to continue this partnership with the League of Women Voters to advance civic representation well beyond the 2020 census. So we look forward to working with you, and thank you so much for this opportunity to speak today.
Okay, there's a question about who makes the ultimate decision on the map designs.
That's a great question. So there's a special committee on redistricting that is chaired by Senator Will Brownsberger in the Senate and Representative Mike Moran in the House. So they will form a statewide map. And then finally, that will get voted on by the full Senate, the full House, and then we'll go to the governor's signature.
Okay. And Margaret, I see you have a question in here about the steps and corresponding timeframes for redistricting. Beth, you want to kind of give an overview in terms of how it relates to the census and what has happened with the census and how that's impacting the timeframe?
Absolutely. So the 2020 census was a census like no other. We conducted it during a global pandemic, and we had a president who was intent on cutting out immigrants from the 2020 census count. So we've never had a president so committed to an inaccurate census who is ready to sabotage the accuracy in so many different ways. So what that means is there are huge delays in the processing of data. That means that the data that was originally supposed to come out on April 1st, which is tomorrow, is actually not going to come out until September 30th of this year. That has some major impacts on our timeline. Members of the House are required to live in their districts for one full calendar year before being elected. That means that we have by November 8th to draw House districts. And so we are working with a difficult and tight timeline. That means that starting this process early, working with the committee chairs early to make sure that they schedule hearings well before the data comes out so that people can share what their community of interest is super, super important. And That's why we're running these trainings this summer, so that as many communities can define their communities of interest early on, share those with the legislature, and then we also are playing with lots of different types of data, including projections from the American Community Survey and voter file information, to ensure that we have a plan and a map ready to go as soon as the data from the Census Bureau for redistricting drops in September.
Okay, thank you. And here's a question I know I've gotten often with regards to redistricting in Massachusetts. Certainly from a National League perspective, we hear about so much of the partisan gerrymandering happening in other states. And this question relates to how maps are drawn in Massachusetts, and it's specifically about the makeup of the committee, and that is the drawing of these maps bipartisan.
It is done with input from every legislator. As many of you know, the legislature is 82% Democratic. And so I think more so than partisan gerrymandering, I wanted to bring folks' attention to the issue of racial gerrymandering. We see a lot of districts that, as Juan was pointing out, they're a combination of a city or town that is substantially more diverse and is substantially lower income. And then there's another part of the district that is much higher income and has a lot more homeowners and a lot more white voters. That happens in many districts that I can think of. There's a Malden Melrose district, there's a Charlestown Chelsea district, there's of course the Winthrop Revere district, there's the Easton Brockton district. And I think much more so than partisan gerrymandering, I think that there is racial gerrymandering where the legislature has drawn districts that have enough voters of color who primarily vote Democratic in a general election, but do not cast ballots in a primary election, which means that even in these majority people of color districts or close to majority people of color districts, white elected officials are most commonly elected to these majority POC districts because of the lower turnout among voters of color in the primary elections. This is why of the 20 majority people of color districts in Massachusetts drawn in 2011, 11 of those 20 are represented by white elected officials. 9 are represented by white men, which means that there are as many white men who represent majority people of color districts as people of color. So it's not so much that I think that we have a problem of partisan gerrymandering in Massachusetts. It's actually quite hard to draw more competitive districts. It's very difficult to draw a competitive congressional district in Massachusetts, according to research from Tufts in 2019. But we do have this problem of cracking and packing of gateway cities and much more affluent suburbs right next door.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. What other organizations are involved, nonpartisan organizations are actively involved in redistricting in Massachusetts?
That's a great question. It's a lot of the people who we work with in mass counts, and it's a lot of organizations who we've worked with in the Election Modernization Coalition. So we work closely with organizations like the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition or the MIRA Coalition, with Mass Vote, with Common Cause of Massachusetts. We also work with many community-based organizations such as La Colaborativa and the Chinese Progressive Association and affiliates of Massachusetts Communities Action Network, such as Worcester Interfaith. So those are some of the nonpartisan organizations who we work with. We also work with some organizations that other membership organizations, such as the Massachusetts AFL-CIO and Service Employees International Union, their state council. So we think that the involvement of membership-based organizations is absolutely critical to defining these communities of interest, whether they are 501c3s or 501c4s.
Okay, well, thank you so very much, Beth and Juan. We really appreciate you joining us tonight and reviewing with us an overview of the process, and Juan for your experience in Revere, and we really appreciate you helping enlighten us and on this. And we look forward to certainly seeing you in the future, I hope.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Beth, again for all your work.
Okay. All right. Well, also, earlier I mentioned about people who have joined us, and I'd like to welcome Adrian, who is Everett City Councilor. So thank you so much for joining us. I am going to pull up, being a league person, I always have my presentation here. Can't help myself. But being a league, we always like to make sure, and certainly see this from the questions that we have coming in, a little bit more detail around what the process is, what the criteria are, how the league positions fit into what we are doing. And we certainly are looking forward to working very closely with Drawing Democracy and other organizations around the state and within our communities to ensure we have fair maps. So let's start off with what I'll go through is understanding. I know we've had some questions around what's packing and cracking and what a fairness looks like. I'll go through some of that to introduce those concepts first to better understand what the redistricting process is in Massachusetts and who's on the joint committee. And then Elizabeth will follow up with on how you can make an impact in Massachusetts immediately. We have some immediate next steps that we're asking for from league members and local leagues overall. We will have a question and answer period, and I'm going to have to ask one of my other panelists to follow the Q&A because in presentation mode, I can't see the questions that are being asked. So first of all, the U.S. League has been involved in redistricting for a very long time. They started, well, I should say, for almost 20 years. Back in 2006, when they observed across the country a lot of gerrymandering occurring, both partisan and concerns about racial inequities, they participated in a conference around redistricting and what the processes were. And out of that work and continued discussion of it, the League did a study on a national level, and then in the convention of 2016, adopted this position, official position on redistricting. And as we all know from a League standpoint, we always go back to our positions to ensure that we have had them very well thought out and they're based upon our study and consensus as we do our advocacy work and education work. And this is what it basically is, that we support redistricting processes and standards that promote fair and effective representation at all levels of government with maximum opportunity for public participation. Basically, what the League is looking for is that the people elect the representatives they want as opposed to the elected officials choosing the voters that they want. Is basically how we kind of sum that down in terms of what our position is. So in terms of criteria, I'm sorry.
This is Patty. Can I just stop you for a second?
Sure.
Are you sharing your slides?
I thought I was.
Okay. You're
Are
not.
they not showing?
Sorry.
Okay, let me escape and try this again. I apologize.
Okay, that's okay.
Here we go. Let's try this. Share that.
You got it.
Awesome.
Well, wait a minute. Maybe not. I'm going to stop share for a moment and get this into this actual
Okay.
presentation mode. There we go. What I don't understand is, okay, we're going to go this way. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, beautiful.
Perfect. I'm so sorry. What you get when you get an old lady trying to do technology. So this is our statement, our position from the League, National League. And how does it advance now?
I think you can tap any button on your keyboard and it should advance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not having any luck with that. Here we go. Let's try this. There we go. So our criteria based upon our position starts off with the legal definitions, which is basically substantially equal population, the districts being contiguous from a geographic standpoint. That is, you can't have islands of districts around a state or a county. And then we move into the criteria. So it's promotion of partisan fairness, so that who's represented in the state, for the federal offices and state offices, or even in municipalities, promote partisan fairness. And that is, not protecting the incumbents, but rather looking for what the voters want. Also, preservation and protection of community of interests, which I'll cover in just a moment what those are. And then finally, moving on to respecting boundaries for municipalities and counties. Now, it's sometimes important to note that the communities of interest may cross over into municipalities in different counties. And in some cases, it may make more sense to have those communities of interest kept together than to say the municipality should stay together. And there's some examples of that around the country. And then the final criteria is compactness and competitiveness, but only if that does not conflict with any of the other criteria above. So a very compact district may not be the one that is the most fair. So that is really the last criteria that we would use in terms of looking at redistricting, and is the bottom of the line. So we explicitly reject protecting incumbents, and we also reject preferential treatment for a political party by looking at voter registration and affiliation, voting history, and the candidate's residence. So we're looking for, again, fair maps that represent people. Looking at the criteria then as applied in Massachusetts, and this is directly the criteria that have been developed with the Drawing Democracy Coalition has put forward, are first of all, obviously our legal requirements, which is equal population and the one person, one vote rule, which is embedded in our 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And then also ensuring that the Voting Rights Act is met in terms of addressing any history of a discrimination that's faced by communities of color, and also protecting communities of color so that they can elect the candidates, as Juan was describing, that reflect their choices and their positions so that they can get their voice heard within the legislature and in the Congress. The strategy to do this is by focusing on communities of interest. Now, communities of interest are a group of people who have common policy concerns, and it would be beneficial to keep them maintained in one district so that they can have their voice heard and elect the officials who would represent them. So say, well, what would that be? That would be, first of all, it would be defined by the people in the community itself. So this is not something that people come in from outside and say, oh, you're a community of interest. This is where it gets involved, where we can provide support, or you go into your community and find out where there are groups that have common interests. And these interests could be defined by things such as where do people go to school? What type of transportation do people use? Is there a group that in the community that relies very heavily on public transportation? Where the healthcare is provided? Where the jobs are? What the income, education levels are? What the traditions are, the language, et cetera, within the community. So those are communities of interest. So they're defining what binds a community together. It's important to note that race is not in and of itself defining a community of interest. It really needs to have other elements that binds it together in terms of what is considered a community of interest. And the reason for that is that if race only is used, the criteria for community of interest. That is one way that people have used to start packing districts and actually end up reducing the voice of those groups in the redistricting process. So what are the fairness factors? Because we have people-powered fair maps. We talk about fair maps in Massachusetts. So in discussion in terms of what does that look like, there are ways that minority or the vote can be diluted for minorities, whether it's communities of interest or racial or ethnic minorities, voices can get diluted in this process. One is called cracking, and that's basically taking a population of voters who have, who are defined and splitting them up across several different districts, and therefore they never have enough critical mass to get their voice heard and get to elect the people who they believe should be representing them. And that is, I think, an example of what Juan was talking about within the Revere-Winthrop district and what has happened there. The other way is packing, and that is where like-minded voters, they take all the like-minded voters who are defined either by race or by communities of interest, but they basically pack them all together into one district. And so they have enough votes to elect the candidate that they feel represents them, but there are a lot of wasted votes. It's like, you have 85% of the people voting that way. Well, they get the voice heard, but then it doesn't give them the fair representation in the legislature or with elected officials. So in the example I have here, we have two equal populations of the purples and the greens, and we're drawing 4 districts. And they're located, look at that as, say, a location on where they're living with relation to each other. And in this situation, we've drawn 4 districts, but through cracking and packing, the green group is only going to get their voice heard in one of those 4 districts, where the purple group is going to have their voice heard in 3 of them. So that is unfair representation, because that's a 75 to 25 split, when in fact the population is really 50-50. So the representation just isn't going to be fairly representative of who lives there. So this is illegal if it's done solely on race, and this has been certainly taken to the Supreme Court, and maps have been thrown out because of that. And it's a violation of the Voting Rights Act when this happens. So what do other maps look like? This is what we are looking as we draw fair maps within Massachusetts, through understanding, identifying, working with communities of interest, making sure that helping get that testimony in front of the Joint Committee on Redistricting, and helping look at different maps. So through training and helping communities or doing it in our own communities, we can draw different maps with the same configuration, same number of people, but they come up with having 2 districts that are likely going to elect representatives who represent their interests and who they want to have in there and understand them. So that's the difference between this is what cracking and packing can do to dilute voices. And this is how, through really getting the voices heard and looking at different maps, can make sure that we have fair districts when we do redistricting. And this is an extreme example of what happened in 2010 in North Carolina. There were 2 districts that are infamous. There's the 12th and the 1st congressional districts, which were racially gerrymandered. They were packed with Black voters and led to unfair representation within the state. These 2 maps were thrown out by the Supreme Court and ordered redrawn for the 2016 election, so that it did start to move away from the racial gerrymandering that had occurred there. And you can see this 12th district, I believe, is like along a highway pretty much. And then here's a block of people. And then there's like this little tendril down here, which was specifically designed to pack in Black voters. This is the original gerrymander out of Massachusetts. I'm sure some of you will recognize some of the town names up there. And this was done in 1820. It goes to show you don't have to necessarily have computers to gerrymander. So just a real quick overview on how redistricting works in Massachusetts. Beth described some of it already. It is done by a legislature, by a joint committee, and they will run the process. The process was redefined in 2010 by this joint committee to make it transparent and to ensure there was significant community input into redrawing those maps. And so while if you look at league positions, we talk about independent commissions are the gold standard, and that certainly is what we believe overall. However, in Massachusetts, we have a process as was designed in 2010, 2011, that we feel leads to transparent maps with good input and are seeking to represent the population in Massachusetts. The state legislature runs the process. They draw the congressional district and state legislative maps in 2021. And as Beth described, those need to be drawn by November 8th of 2021 because of the way our state constitution is written for the House seats. And then once those are voted on and approved by both chambers in our state house, the governor must approve the maps, and then they would be used for future elections to 2030 for the congressional and state legislative districts. Then the following year, starting in 2022, city councils are responsible for redistricting at their city level districts. And I encourage all the local leagues who live in cities to start asking and finding out what is the plans in their cities to draw the districts. Some cities do it on a regular basis, realizing that there are changes in population. Some cities, such as Boston, have not drawn their city districts for a very long time. Boston, I believe, has not done city level districts since 1920. So this is a very important because it's not only ensuring fair representation at in Congress, in the state legislative areas, it also is ensuring that at our local government, as we all know, so many important decisions are made there so that we have fair representation in city government and in school committees, et cetera. So something for local leagues to start looking and understanding how that works and what may be happening there next year. This is the joint committee, special joint committee for redistricting that was appointed in mid-February. Senator Brownsberger and Representative Moran are the chairs of this committee. At the end of the presentation, and this will be posted on our website, we have identified the local leagues that in which these representatives reside. So it's a great opportunity for you to keep that in mind. And when you meet with your representative on a regular basis, particularly if they're on this committee, and particularly if they're a chair or a vice chair, to talk with them about what's going on in redistricting and to let them know that the league is very interested and that we're going to be working with coalition of organizations and in our communities to make sure that public input is provided on the maps overall. So that you'll be able to see and map those together and keep that in mind as we move forward. Overall, this would be the nice process. If in a normal year, this would have been in April and the data would be released, there would be public hearings, maps drafted, map approval, and then the maps used for elections from 2022 to 2030. As we know, the census data is very late in being released. The committee is currently working very diligently to figure out how to conduct the process, still maintaining these steps, still maintaining significant public hearings, input on maps, seeing maps that can be, where the public can provide maps for consideration by the committee. So the specific timeline on when these steps will be happening has yet to be defined. Keep an eye open for what we put out either on the website or in our newsletters or in action alerts on when things will start to be happening and ways for you to be involved in the process as we move forward. The commitment thus far is that I believe that there is not going to be a delay in the process. The maps need to be redrawn. It's just a question of how do we get from point A to point B in the process with the lateness of the data being released. And with that, I hope that provides an overview. I focused on Massachusetts because that's important for us. And let me pull up the questions and put on my glasses so I can read.
Yeah, I can start. This flows from something you just mentioned about the census data being delayed. Adrian out in Western Mass asks, I have heard that municipalities will receive preliminary census data well in advance of September 30th, enabling municipalities to begin the redistricting process. What can you tell us?
In the upcoming newsletter, the first step in the redistricting process is doing re-precincting at the local level. So Adrian, if you could send me some information, because that's one of the areas that I'm requesting local leagues to find out what's happening within the municipalities, and what they're hearing. So if you can send me that information at my email, I would greatly appreciate it, because that, a lot of times things happen on the ground that are not quite as obvious to us at the state level or in the legislature. So that would be helpful to know.
And Judy, just a follow on, Nancy Brumback is asking, what is re-precincting and how does that affect redistricting?
Good question. The state law is that precincts are to be drawn by the 15th of June. Well, the official census data will not be available by the 15th of June. Re-precincting is where municipalities, so it's done at the municipal level, and it's up to the select board or the town manager or the mayor to determine whether the precincts in that municipality are going to be actually redrawn. Many times municipalities will keep those precincts, and the precincts will run anywhere from a couple thousand up to, I think they can't be any bigger than 6,200. That is where that is used to set where your voting place is. And then they're also used many times for also drawing other districts within a municipality. The state seeks not to divide up precincts as they do redistricting, but it is one of the building blocks that is used in the redistricting process. And that's why seeing how those are going to be done with the lateness of the census data coming out is one of the points that's still up in the air. So it'd be interesting as to Adrian, as to what you're hearing from your municipality in terms of what they're anticipating doing. And I think Beth might be typing in an answer also to that question.
Yes, so that's all exactly right, Judy. And re-precincting is like the wonky sister of redistricting. It is really important, especially in places with representative town meeting, since that requirement that each district have equal population comes into play with re-precincting, since town meeting is determined based off of how many people live in precincts. So if you live in a town, we definitely need your help in monitoring the re-precincting process, because your equal representation in town meeting is definitely at stake with re-precincting.
Okay.
Judy, do you want another one from me?
Oh, Patty, I couldn't quite, I was looking down through the questions here.
So Susan Hand has asked something non-Massachusetts related, but she wants to know, are there particular states where the league needs to be particularly vigilant as they go into this process? So other places around the country?
Oh yeah, on phone calls with other state leagues, you probably can pick off the states that are quite challenging. Texas is one. There's a number of states that the redistricting process is being sought to be done in basically behind closed doors. It really depends on who is running that. I believe if you go to the US League website, you can get a rundown in terms of what states have independent commissions, which states are ones that are being run by the legislature and are highly partisan, potentially highly partisan, I should say. Leagues throughout the country in all 50 states are working aggressively to make it an open process and make sure the public is involved. So going around the state, including things like doing education forums around. I talked to a woman who's doing that in North Carolina. She's traveling around the state, talking with whoever will listen with her about why it's important to have fair redistricting. And she even got a Republican county chair on board with her to help get the message out. So I really applaud people like that. What is important to remember as we go into things that are done by the state, it's always good to kind of keep track and see what's going on elsewhere. But at the end of the day, the politicians in those states are only going to listen to the voters who are in those states. And that's why it has to be done on a state by state basis. And so our focus is on what can we do working with partners and within our communities to ensure that in Massachusetts, we achieve fair maps, and in particular that we achieve maps that will lead us to better racial equity in terms of our government. So it's interesting to watch what goes on in other states, and you can certainly monitor that. But where we really can leverage and have an impact is by focusing on Massachusetts and what's happening here and helping out.
Judy, there are a couple of questions, and maybe between you and Patty, you could answer related to staying informed about hearings, about next steps, what things are happening. There are a few questions that relate to that.
Certainly. We'll be pulling together a toolkit that we'll be putting up on the League website that will include things like this webinar, templates for letter to the editor that you can write. We will also send out, as the hearings are defined and we start having training sessions and opportunities to be involved, we'll be putting that both on our website, but we'll in action newsletters. If there's something that's like immediate, like write a letter, make sure you go to the hearing, we'll use our action alert system. At the end of the presentation, when Elizabeth goes through next steps, we do have, following Drawing Democracy, there'll be a lot of announcements there. That's a good way to keep track of what's going on, and both on Facebook and Twitter. So I'd encourage you to do that also for announcements on the process, where it stands, and how to be involved.
And I think you mentioned this, Judy, but Jen just reminded me that for League members, certainly when there's a quick turnaround and we need action, we'll send an action alert and get, take to Twitter and Facebook and that kind of thing.
Right. The anticipation is that, and Beth, correct me if I'm wrong, but I anticipate that the training sessions initially through Drawing Democracy are going to be done virtually, and because of the pandemic. And which, it's kind of nice to be face to face, but I think also doing things virtually allow us to be able to do things across the state and bring in a lot more people that way too. One of the things that if you're aware of people with different language skills that represent the various populations in Massachusetts, that would be very helpful in terms of encouraging them to become involved, and see if you can recruit them to help out in terms of training and perhaps participation with in communities to help train other groups on providing testimony, how to give testimony, and input onto maps.
Thank you, Judy. I'm thinking, given the time, we probably want to move on to the next steps and let people know
Okay.
that we will be looking through these Q&As to see any that we missed. And
Okay.
if in fact we did, we will add that to the information related to the toolkit and the redistricting that will be on the website.
Okay, so let me stop sharing. Oh, I guess I go on to the.
You need to share.
Right, that's right. Okay, and so I'll hand it off to Elizabeth here, and I need to find my arrow again. Here we go. All right, so how you can get involved?
So since we know this is a group of people here from the League who love to do action and are really good at taking things that we are advocating for and contacting people and moving the ball forward on this, we did want to talk about how you can in fact impact the people-powered fair maps in Massachusetts. And it would be great if you can share this information with 5 friends, 10 friends. We're not limiting you on the number of friends to share it with, but it's somewhat a mystery for people. They know that it happens after the census. but they don't really know what happens. So if you have a group of friends, if you have a book group, perhaps you could share it then. And this will be available so that you can, share this with them, or just parts of it that you think would be beneficial to share with people. Then, of course, social media. Everything is being out there in social media. So there are places that you can follow, and you can also retweet things from Twitter, and you can also share things on your own Facebook pages. And you'll see there are hashtags here. People Powered Fair Maps hashtag, and then the Fair Maps Massachusetts. Then you should also be following, feel free to follow at Drawing Democracy Massachusetts on Facebook and Twitter. I started following them today. Easy to find and easy to retweet things. And if you have a facility of a second language, which was talked a little bit earlier, second or third language, feel free to also, when you are retweeting or commenting, to add a second or third language there. Because while I think a lot of us are familiar, some of us don't like using it, but we're familiar with the Facebook and the Twitter. With Twitter, it is nice to have it in another language for people who do not have English as their primary language. And also, if you do know people who speak and write fluently in another language, they would be great to recruit as we're putting out more information on toolkits. As we're doing a letter to the editor, things like that. So they're having them in other languages, because obviously this is impacting a lot of people, and not everybody who will be impacted. And in fact, some of those who may be impacted the most may not have the access or be, so active on social media. So that is an area where, we, like with the census, where we had to do things in multiple languages, we want to make sure that we're going to be able to do things in multiple languages here. So that is an area to think about, because you may know somebody that you hadn't even thought about, who you could bring in. And the other thing is, we would love to have you join the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, or your local league if you're not a league member. It's a great group. We're not all women, so for the men that are joining us this evening, we would love to have you join us also. But that way you'll also be getting up-to-date league newsletters, action alerts, and understand what's going on, and work with others in the local league or at the state level. And you can go to lwvma.org and get all that information. But we'd love to see you if you are not a member, although I saw a lot of members on here. But if you're not, please join us. Meet with your local elected officials. Look at, we'll have in the upcoming slides, especially those that are in your district who are on the committee. But even if they're not on the committee, and you have a community that you are interested in, please meet with them. They want to hear from you. As Judy said previously, if you're in their district, they're going to listen to you a lot more than if you're not in their district. But that being said, as a league member, we do have a very good reputation with the state league, with the state of Massachusetts and the representatives and the senators. So if you happen to know someone and you have a good connection, or even if you don't and you just are really concerned about an area, give them a call, talk to them, get an appointment with them. As we slowly go back to in-person meetings, many of the state representatives and state senators that I've spoken with are still going to be doing Zoom meetings. They do phone calls. So it doesn't mean that you have to go into Boston. Phone calls and Zoom works for them. And for local leagues, you may want to consider about inviting some of these people who are the chairs or co-chairs or in your specific area to come to a meeting and to have a conversation. They love talking to the league. I think you guys know that. Usually you get a pretty good response when you ask them to come and to chat with you. And then I'm going to reiterate a couple of things after I talk about the people-powered fair maps, which this is through the State League. So save the date. April 29th is going to be the People-Powered Day of Action. The Massachusetts League will have more information on this probably in about a week or so, to give you an idea of what will be happening statewide here. But if you are a local league and you've already decided what you're doing, please make sure to register with the League of Women Voters US, so that they will know what is happening. But this is, again, something that is going to be, we suspect there will be virtual events, but there may be some very small in-person events, depending where things are at the end of April, in different communities. But we will be sharing that on the league website, so that you are aware of what's going on. And we would like you to share with us what you are doing, because it's very important for us to understand what you are doing and to help strengthen your efforts, for everything that you're doing also. And then, as Beth was saying, I just want to reiterate, and she did put in the chat the Drawing Democracy website, which we will make sure is available. But she was talking about finding your community of interest, recruiting people who are similarly situated, or have that community of interest for them, and attend the hearings, the redistricting hearings, write letters to the editor. And one of the things that I think is important, and Judy talked about it a little bit, Beth definitely talked about it, but stay engaged. It's a long process. As anybody who was involved with the census knows, think about when that started, and then what happened, and then how that became longer. And now it's going to be longer for us to get the information that we need. So it's really important for us to stay engaged throughout, because it is going to matter. And the last thing we want is for the people who are doing this to think, oh, it doesn't matter anymore. They're really not that interested. I don't suspect that will happen with this group of people. It never has. They continue to follow the fight, the issue, etc. And then the other thing that I'm not sure everybody heard, but I thought was a very nice point for Beth to bring up is, consider running for any seats that may be created as a result of this. Or once we see what these maps look like, if there are new districts, do you know somebody in that district? Do you know, are you in that district? Is there a new seat? So think about that piece of it as we finally get that information, and hope in September, maybe August, maybe there'll be a little summer surprise for us and we'll get it a little early. I don't know that we will. But it is one of those things where we're in this for the long haul. And we really appreciate what people have been doing even up to this point, and people attending tonight and asking questions. And we will, stay tuned for the website, so that you can easily, our goal is to have it so that you can easily find that, and the toolkit and the things that you will need to move forward in this huge effort, but a really important effort for all of us. Every 10 years, this happens. We have a really good opportunity right now, I think, in Massachusetts to be impactful about this. So I want to thank everybody who was able to attend and join us this evening. And I want to ask Judy if she has any other thoughts that she would like to add as we are getting ready to close out.
Thank
We
you.
promised to keep you guys.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I think appreciate everybody showing up, and I believe that look forward to working with you, and we'll have more information posted soon. So have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for attending, everybody.